Welcome. This is Dr. John DeMartini. This is one of the most amazing and inspiring shows that you can listen into. If you want to be on the edge of your seats, if you want to open up your heart, if you want to expand your mind, and you want to meet incredible people, stay tuned because you're just about to experience a transformative radio show that will change your life. And you're listening to the Dr. Pat Show that's coming up right next.
Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. Talk radio to thrive by. Powerful, inspiring, and coming to you live, bringing you stories of people like you and me, busting through and living life full out. Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail.
Hey, everybody, I want to welcome you. Welcome to the show. Look, I am so thrilled. I want to thank you for tuning us in, turning us on. And yes, I did get your emails from the previous shows today, and I will get back to you as soon as I can, which is literally by the end of today. Thank you so much. Today, Jacob, today I get to talk to someone that is so in the zone of my life experience later in life, but I've had very tough time trying to put the experiences into words. Now, really have hard time putting the experiences on paper. But when I talk about Joseph Selbie, when I talk about not just this book we're going to talk about, but the many, many ways that Joseph has showed up, and what he's created, and discovering along the way who he would become and is still yet to become. It is so wonderful that I get to have this conversation with him. And here's why. If you grew up and you understand that a lot of your life shows up as limitation, the question then comes up, how do you explain to people around you that you are continually breaking through? Then how do you get past the brain conversation? And so you all have heard me talk about my, what's the word I want to use? Growing up and being classified in certain group. Bottom line is slow. She's slow, right? She can't read, she can't write, she's slow, except when it came to art and music and cartoon characters. But why is that? And then the other question then becomes, how do you explain external environments in your life, and yet you are the pinnacle of optimism? But what happens when you can't make the connection from what you read or what you're told or what you practice between the many, many connections that we have in the brain and consciousness? Now, when somebody handed me, I don't even know what year it was, because I certainly wasn't the woman I am today. But when somebody handed me Herbert Benson's book, I think it was his first book on response. And I read in his book a very descriptive paragraph or two. It was a short paragraph. It was like so small. It was like teeny weeny. Like, you know, he writes this great book. But then Benson then goes and there's like this one paragraph. Of course, that would be the thing I would remember at the time. And he describes for the layperson, because that's what we're going to get into today. He describes for the layperson how many connections we have in the brain. And he goes through and he tells you, he says, put a sheet of paper on your desk. Now, pile that sheet of paper, and he goes on, pile that sheet of paper and like have it go up past the country, the earth. Oh, now have it go to the moon. Keep piling the paper. And he goes on and on and on up into the point of something like 16 billion light years. And you stop for a minute and say, this guy is either correct or he's just lost it. Today, we live in a world where we now know something. But what we don't know is what Joseph's going to help us with today in his fabulous book. And when I think about living in a time where many of us have questioned ourselves, have questioned our ability to live in 1 foot here, 1 foot there, have questioned our intuition, have questioned whether we thought we were okay or just can't explain why conceptually we came up with something. What if we had the answer today? What if we get an answer today? What if we understand now why? So much information, so much in our pop culture, so many blockbuster movies are connecting science and consciousness. Well, fasten your seatbelt because we are going to have that and so much more. Joseph, thank you for joining us today. So great to have you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Look, this is not the first conversation you've had. You've done many, many things in your life. You are known for many things. You have started foundations. I mean, if you're like me, you've probably retired from a bunch of jobs and who knows. But here's the question. I want to know, out of everything that I've just said, all that you are, I want to know what some of the challenges and obstacles are that you had to overcome to bring you to this very moment right now.
Well, I think I have the same biggest challenge that everyone has, which is that it's very, very easy to go with the flow of the brain, to go with the flow of all of the mental habits, perceptions, patterns that you've developed over the years, and just be drawn along by them day in and day out. So you get up in the morning, you have circuits that fire in your brain, and then you go to bed at the end of the day having just experienced a steady chain reaction of circuits all day long. And I think that, you know, if you have good circuits, let's say, that might seem like a good day. If you have circuits that cause you grief, pain, or depression, then it could have been a horrible day. But in either case, it's our brains, patterns, the habits we've developed of thinking, memory, being, emotion, that determine our day-to-day life. So that is the biggest challenge. It's also the biggest opportunity because we can get past those limits. We can break through the limit, as I describe in my book. And the number one key way to do it is to meditate, is to connect to those realms and realities that are beyond the physical brain.
Look, I love that we're talking about this because, I mean, you have to know a little bit about me. I'm coming up on my 20-year doing a show that most people thought would last 20 minutes. 20 years ago, if you talked about positive anything, they kind of booed you and threw tomatoes at you, right? But here's the thing I love. Somebody I studied with, and I love this quote, and this comes directly from Dr. Matt James. And I remember we would do these shows and have these conversations, and he would always look at me and say at the end, Pat, no matter whatever you think you are, you're more than that. And I can't help but tie that so much into your book. I can't help make the connection, except I believe you take it one step further and you explain what that more is a little bit. But yet we sit now, and I don't know how I want to ask you this question. I think you call it a certain level of materialism. But there's a level of, may I say it, brainwashing that could happen, that could dim the light of our awareness so that we actually think we have to play the game not to lose, as opposed to playing to win and opening up the world of possibilities. Now, my language, not yours, but I want to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that is profoundly true. And it's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to break through the limits of the brain is because the narrative today, the core scientific materialism approach to reality is that there isn't anything more than the brain. There's nothing to break through to. We just have our brain, and that our brain creates the conscious awareness that we have. It stores all the memories. It is the source of all mental, emotional experience.
Yeah.
And that narrative is very, very powerful, which means realistically, most people don't seek anything beyond that.
Yeah.
And as then I said earlier, if you have good circuits, then people will think they're living a good life. And if they have bad circuits, they are tortured by it, but they don't think of getting beyond those circuits for the most part, because that is the scientific narrative.
Okay, I got to ask you, I got to hit you up with this question right now, because when I read your book, it so much explains my life's journey in so many ways. Not as eloquently as you have done it, and certainly not with the really crazy good stories you put in here. I love the whole, like story, the crazy strength story. I mean, you do such a beautiful job of taking the world of neuroscience and bringing it in the space that people can relate to it. See, that's, I think, part of the missing issue for a lot of this. But, what you're doing in the book is you're giving us almost like my grandma's great spaghetti gravy recipe. You're giving us the right ingredients to just pure perfection of the taste of possibilities. But here's what I walk away from. I grew up mentally challenged in the world that measures you on IQ. They do that, right? I think they still do that. But I look back and I read a book like yours, and I'll tell you, when I read the books, I write on them, I note on them, I make sense of them, because I've never been able to explain when people ask me the question, how have you done what you've done in the world? When you talk about your limitations, I don't use the word limitations, by the way, but when you talk about those limitations you had at a younger age. And here's my answer. For lack of anything else, divine intervention, being attached to it, being aware of it at a very young age, of some kind of knowing that despite the fact that there are some people can't read, can't write, are dyslexic, somehow, without any of that, they can make blockbuster movies like Top Gun, right? That's what is so hopeful in the world we live in today. So many people are being labeled right now, but doesn't what your work and your book says, that we're not just breaking through the limitations of the brain, we're breaking through the external world's view of our limitations of our brains?
Yes, without doubt. One of the phrases I use in my book is that we have always one foot in heaven and one foot on earth, that so much of what we are, which material science tells us is the expression of the brain, is actually the expression of spirit beyond the brain. It's the expression of spirit in that one foot we have in heaven. And that is the source of creativity. That is the source of the mind knitting everything together that comes through the senses and turning it into a full and coherent picture. That is where we get intuition from. It's where we get our memories and our ideas from, always, constantly. And that's, I think, the hardest thing for people perhaps to appreciate, is that we are simultaneously existing in a physical body and in a non-physical body that exists beyond the physical world. And that is our everyday awareness. It's not as if we have to, wait until we die to experience that one foot in heaven. It's a continuous reality that we have today. And you can tap into that heavenly reality. You can tap into those higher aspects of yourself anytime, regardless of the physical body. Let me tell you a story that always
Please.
blows people's minds, which is that a Dr. Lorber did a study of adults who had been diagnosed with what was called, and still is called, water on the brain, hydroencephalitis. And those children were, in theory, cured But as it turned out, many of them weren't. And Dr. Lorber found 60 examples of children who still had mostly water, spinal fluid in their brain, including one man who had nearly 95% of the space in his skull was full of spinal fluid. And yet, this man had a IQ of 136, and he was a professional mathematician. So it's a very profound way of saying the brain doesn't matter anywhere near as much as we think it does for us to be able to do what we need to do. And it really comes down to, like in your case, just willing to do it. Saying, I'm not going to be limited by whatever people say about my brain or whatever the reality of my brain is. I am going to push past it and discover this vast well of creativity, of joy, of inspiration, of intuition that is just waiting for us to tap into it.
Yeah, I love this conversation, but I want to make sure everybody knows, for those of you just tuning in, I hope if you've missed any part of this, we're going to replay it later. This is Break Through the Limits of the Brain, Neuroscience, Inspiration, and Practices to Transform Your Life. Here's what I want to say about this. We're going to talk to Joseph Selbie. We're going to talk to Joseph when we come back. Look, I'm not saying that you could do 2 out of 3 of those and get some level of my movement. However, when you kick in the other one, when you kick in the practice part and you realize whatever you think it was, it's not as hard as you think. And then you experience something. Your life changes. So if this is so truly how this could work, what is the movement we have to create now to help billions of people move behind the limits that their brains are telling him right now about the past 3 years? When we come back, there's a missing ingredient. There's a missing ingredient to Grandma Mama Maria's sauce. There's a missing ingredient that we're going to give you when you come back. And when you hear it, you're going to say, that's it. But Joseph actually talked about it. Joseph, what's your website? Let's make sure people know how to get the book.
It's fairly easy. It's josephselbie.com. The spelling of my last name is somewhat unusual. It's Selbie rather than the more common spelling of Selby. So josephselbie.com.
Okay, I want you guys to ponder this while we go to break. This is one of the quotes from Joseph's book. Rumi. It's a Rumi. It's one of my favorite Rumis. I ask myself this question all the time. You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life? Joseph's going to take that one on. Let's take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back. Everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. Look, I'm so thrilled. There's so much in this book that I want to talk to you all about. And if I don't get to it, I'm sure Joseph won't mind coming back. We have done work with the people, the publishers of the book for 2 decades, pretty much. But the quote I just mentioned, and again, I want to get the website. How do people get to the website? Because the book is one thing. There's so much more.
So the website is josephselbie.com. Selbie spelled Selbie.
Thank you. Look, I want to really talk about neuroscience too. But the missing piece to my little story, and I shared it during the break, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, is I had a spiritual connection with a form of the divine. Now, I know there are many forms in my life now, but I had a spiritual connection at a very young age, even before Catholic boarding school. I can't explain it. I don't try to anymore, but I did have it. And that left me with a level of optimism for life. And that level of optimism is why I wrote a chapter in a book that says, it's called there's something about her, because that's what people say about me, but I never know if they're talking like something good or something not good. But see, this is a connection that you alluded to before, and I want to get to it. You referred to meditation. I want to explain to people the science of that and why that's so important, and where does meditation take you to? Now, I will admit, for the first bunch of years I did this show, I was not the woman you're talking to today. As a matter of fact, I mispronounced meditation so many times, calling it medication, but I now think they're one and the same. Help me out here.
Well, as you say, meditation is the key, but I think sometimes it's better just to say, people are impressed that I've meditated for 50 years now, but they're impressed in the way that you might be impressed that somebody took a long walk every morning for 50 years, right? And that is impressive, and it's healthful, but really it's not about having a routine for 50 years. It's connecting to spirit.
Yeah.
For 50 years. And that's really what meditation does for us. Now, meditation for many people is challenging. It was challenging for me, and in many ways it's still challenging, because the mind tends to gallop and the body tends to fidget. And if you aren't able to, quickly and successfully connect into spirit, it sometimes seems like meditation is a waste of your time. But if you persist and learn to sit still, just find a position that is comfortable. It doesn't have to be cross-legged on the floor at all. Be in a comfortable chair, sit upright, get to the point where however many pillows it takes, however many different chairs you need to try, get to the point where you can just sit still. And then resist the tendency to fidget, which all of us have. And then you'll find that you begin to relax much more deeply than you normally do. And at the same time, the tendency for the mind to just gallop along on any old train of thought that you happen to have hit upon, from yesterday's conversation with someone to the movie you saw last night or last year, that tendency also begins to go down, and that this kind of explosion of neural circuits in the brain slows down. And when and as it does, you just feel enormously better. You relax at a level that you may have even forgotten you could even relax at.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, it feels completely normal. You say to yourself, well, of course, this is what it means to relax. Imagine you've been on a 2-week vacation, and that last day, you're just feeling like, wow, this was a great vacation. That's how you can feel if you get past fidgeting physically and galloping mentally. You can feel that same sense of deep relaxation. And in that deep relaxation is the gateway to connecting to spirit. As I said earlier, we always have one foot in heaven and we always have one foot on earth. We tend to get preoccupied with the one foot on earth and not be as aware of the one foot in heaven. But meditation allows us to become more aware of that one foot in heaven.
Yeah.
We feel that connection to spirit. We feel inspiration. We feel energized. We feel creative. Yeah, what thoughts that do come are much more elevating and much more transformative to what we're going to do in our life. And that's what meditation can deliver. It can connect us to spirit, can connect us to our natural, always present being in spirit.
this is so important for so many people to understand. The other thing too is, as you're talking about this, and I went back and reread the book and did some other things, looked at some of the other articles on your website as well. What I was acutely aware of, I reflected upon a time. I had people call them flashbacks. I don't know, whatever you want to call them. But I'm reading through this, and part of my learning different is what we're called now. Part of that is actually turned out to be a gift. Why?
Yes.
Because when I read your words, I don't see words. My brain puts them into imagery.
Right.
And I had a flashback this morning, and I can't remember where it was in the book. I think it was right after the part in the book where you're talking about the limits of the brain, but you're explaining neuroscience to us and the connections. And here's what I flash back on, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Because I was reading a part of the book that was pretty scientific, but yet I went right to this moment. I'm 17 years old. I'm in the streets of New York. I'm homeless. I was, literally thrown out, and I'm sitting on a corner, and New York was different then. You had a lot of street people, right? You had a lot of things going on back then. And I remember sitting on a corner, and this group of people, all dressed in white, all white, tambourines, right next to me on my corner. So that was my first thought. But they started to do what I now know as chanting. And within minutes, I went from annoyed to some other place. I don't have language for it. But everything around me stopped. It was as if I had a moment with these people who later took me in for a couple of days and gave me clean clothes. They were the Hare Krishna people. But I remember that so vividly in something I was reading. It was an intervention, which I refer to as a spiritual intervention. And what I talk about is street smart spirituality, because that's me. But I remember it so distinctly reading your book today, and I don't know why. But what I remember is how calm and safe I felt. Filthy, dirty, sitting on a curb in the middle of Manhattan on 8th and Times Square. And these people show up, beautiful white, beautiful sounds, and the noise stopped.
Yeah, it is amazing when we have experiences like that to not just know intellectually, but to experience that the conditions around us don't matter.
They don't matter
anywhere near as much as the conditions in our heart and mind.
Yeah.
And that we genuinely can be at, deep levels of peace and connection to spirit, even in situations like you describe. And sometimes it's those situations that stimulate it, because it's kind of frightening to think this is all I've got is my street corner in the Bronx or wherever you were. And that can really open us at times of need. But it's also a valuable lesson for anything. I mean, I was recently in an auto accident and had a extreme trauma to my spinal cord between C5 and 6 and T2. And the people around me were politely positive, but I could tell they were, this was once I was in the hospital, I could tell they were deeply concerned about my condition. Yet all those many years of meditation left me feeling perfectly comfortable with myself. I wasn't worried about the future, and I was completely happy in the present. And I think that all those years of meditation is what really gave me that kind of emotional poise that I experienced. And I also think it helped me get better faster. I got out of the hospital in 2 weeks and had full range of motion, et cetera, et cetera. So it was kind of part of a physical miracle happened because of the emotional and mental miracle of just staying in spirit, feeling the presence.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. It is so beautiful to have you come from your experience and share that. Many of us have been down a pathway similar, but not all of us have gotten through it in that way. There are some of us that blacked out, ended up in an ambulance. People didn't think you're going to come back. And yet your experience of it was unlike the people around you. But what I love about this is when I think about how you're explaining in the book, and a term that I want to talk about when we come back. There's 3 things I want to talk about when we come back. But this idea of scientific materialism is so captivating to me. And it's a term that many people may or may not know. I want to talk about that when we come back, because there are what I call so many hooks. There's so many hooks. There's ways to get hooked that go against your natural innate ability to know differently. I want to talk to you about that when we come back. And for those of you, I just got a question from somebody. I will address your question when we come back as well and talk to Joseph about it. Let's take a short break, Jacob, if we could. When we come back, have you heard that term before? Have you heard scientific materialists? Have you heard that term before? Do you believe that you have the capacity within you? The capacity within you is the following. This quote, "Science's biggest mystery is the nature of consciousness. It is not that we possess bad or imperfect theories of human awareness. We simply have no such theories at all." Dr. Nick Herbert will be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is so cool because we get to have a conversation. As I said before, Joseph Selbie. It's Joseph, S as in Sam, E-L-B as in boy, I-E. You can find out about him. Joseph, now, okay, where can people get the book? That was one of the questions that came in.
It's available pretty much in any e-tailer situation. It's probably in bookstores. It's also available in the Kindle version and in the Audible audiobook version.
Exactly.
For those people who prefer the audio format.
Yeah, I love the audio format. You could take it everywhere, but I also like to read. Thank you to our friends at Sarah Scarlett. Thank you for all of you for making this possible to us. And Linda, thank you. Jacob, thank you. I want to talk about meditation. I got a question I read to you during the break. And you talk about meditation as a way to rewire the brain. Of course, I'm very interested in that. You noticed that I started out with a conversation about Benson, and I think it's a relaxation response. I can't remember the title of the book at the moment.
Right.
Ages ago, it was given to me because somebody was trying to get to me to say, you need to read this and do something different, Pat. But here's the question that came in. Can you please talk about meditation a bit? Dr. Pat, we've heard you talk about the fact that you use the brain tap, and we've also heard people say you have to do it this way in order for meditation to really rewire the brain. Okay, let's get into the science of that. Let's get into the practice of that, because that's also part of your book too, isn't it?
Right. Well, we have wired our brain once and continuously, and so we can rewire it. There's nothing really magical about rewiring the brain. You have to do what you did to wire it in the first place, and that is do something repeatedly, and it can be as quick as a day. Your brain will start to rewire to support that new activity, whether it's meditation or ping pong. The brain is an obliging servant, if you will. And anything you do repeatedly, the brain will say, oh, you want to do this. And you want to be able to do it with less than 100% concentration all the time. So we'll give you some support so that it makes whatever you're doing easier. And the brain will do that over and over for you. So the key to rewiring the brain to connect to spirit is to connect to spirit, which means that any meditation technique that you find that you can make work
Yep.
that connects you to spirit will rewire your brain to connect to spirit. It's that simple and it's that hard. It's simple because you don't have to know what the brain is doing. You just have to know that the brain will rewire to support whatever you're doing. It's hard because you're up against other habits that you have already wired, and they tend to pull you away from anything new that you try to do. So there's a certain amount of will and determination and discipline that you have to apply. As to what type of meditation technique, I'm unfamiliar with brain tap other than knowing that brain tap exists, but there are literally hundreds of different ways to meditate. And on my website, I offer a technique called the Hong Sa technique. You may be interested in giving it a try. But what I would say in a broader sense is whatever technique you find that you can make work, and by make work, I mean find relaxation, find that your mind's headlong rush through thinking about things diminishes, and that you begin to relax.
Yeah.
That's it. Once you learn to relax in meditation, that opens the door to everything else the meditation has to offer you.
Yeah.
Connecting to spirit, intuition, creative thoughts, all of those things come when you relax. So find a meditation technique that allows you to relax, and whatever you find, stick with it. You can try new things as well, but don't feel like there is one that is the best above all others. The best one is the one that works for you.
Yeah. I love that you posted this on your website because, see, my go-to isn't a device, and this is really important to talk about. Look, I learned so much from two guys that I got sober with in the 90s and 80s, rather late 80s. And one of them was interesting because we were put in a group, and one of them was Muslim and the other one was Jewish. And so there were we'd have to stop whatever we were doing because there was something they had to do. But when you talk about the Hong Sa technique, here's what I love about this. And this is what I want to say to people. This is something you could do wherever you are. You see that? You don't need to have your Bluetooth plugged in. You don't need to sit there for until the tape is over. That's really the most important thing that I want to talk about now for what's remaining. Because that question that came from our fabulous, listener or viewer was out of this notion that I've been told so many things, but I don't know about you. For me, I know when I have to, as I call it, take a moment. And let's talk about this because I think you described this technique before a little bit, but this is something you can do if you're in your office. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And yet we have talked about meditation in such remote ways that we have not brought the practicality to it of literally sitting down, feet flat on the floor, and let's go.
Yes, and the Hong Sa technique is not alone in being one that you can do anywhere at any time, assuming you're not driving your car.
Right.
And once you get proficient at it, or even just used to doing it, you can move into that state of slowing the mind down, taking the moment, as you say, very very quickly. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sitting at your desk, sitting in some waiting room, waiting at the airport. You can have a very meaningful, satisfying inner experience in just a few minutes once you learn how to kind of dip into that state.
I'll tell you, and the only reason I know about this is I do play that sport, but I do play it competitively. I play in competitions. We just got 3 gold medals to move us on to the national platform. But if you ever watch myself and my partners in between, one of them is from India, the other one is from China, and you saw us in between sitting on the bench, you'd see what we are doing in between matches. And it's fascinating because when people see us doing that, it's almost as if a crowd draws. You could start to see others come over in quiet and sit. Yet you can hear the pounding and the speed of everything going around you. But it's hard to explain to people that don't know it. But I'll tell you what is said to us after. When we step up and we play the match, we're always told, whether I'm playing partners or myself, how absolutely calm, no matter what the ball is hit, we're not like other players. We don't argue, we don't throw our bats, we don't yell, we don't. Now, I got to ask you this question as we come up to the top. We know what it does in our sport, but this can be done in every aspect of our lives. It's so important. And I want people that are listening today to know that this is an opportunity that is free and available to them if they choose, right?
Yeah, it's free and available. And as you say, it's as you learn to meditate, you'll also realize that you take the benefits of meditation with you from that time. And it builds over time. It's part of this rewiring your brain that the creativity that comes naturally with meditating also rewires you to be more creative. It's not that meditation rewires you to be able to meditate quietly. It rewires your brain to, in many ways, enhance the activities of the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is where concentration is seated, where calmness is seated, where creativity is seated. And those are enormous powers, particularly concentration. When I was listening to you describe the experience with ping pong, the first thing that came to me was, oh, you are not only calm, but you are centered and focused in a way that it's very hard to do if you let yourself get excited, emotionally too up or too down. And you can bring that kind of focus and concentration into anything, cooking. You can bring it into what I do, writing. You can bring it into coding if you're a programmer. You can bring it into any activity, any practice that you need to, and it will make it better. One of the common things you will find among people who are successful in any path in life is that they've learned to concentrate. They've learned to not have this galloping mind taking them off all the time, but they can really focus. Typically, it's on a problem. Something comes to them. What do I do? A lot of us will back away from that, phone call or that email, and we'll worry about it for days, where really very successful people will just immediately think about it, focus on it, come up with a solution, implement the solution, and move on. They are much more able to be productive because they're able to concentrate.
Now, this is important because I want to get back to your book and just to let everybody know, right? We're talking about a technique that it took me years to figure out that I could do this. And I think that I happen to be connected to people I play with that so also believe in this calming and this peacefulness. And we'll even get to the point, and I'm not sure if this is a practice, but we'll also chant out loud. And, of course, when you see us do that, we are not aware of anything around us. We're not aware of there are people watching. We're just not aware of it. And yet, 15 minutes, maybe longer, it's transformative. What can we say to folks now to just help them understand this is truly the intersection of science, spirituality, understanding the body, and it's available to all of us. There isn't one person that has a better option and outcome than another, because the science doesn't dictate our limitations. What it says is these are possibilities if we can learn the practices, right?
Yeah. Anyone can rewire their brain. Let's just say that straight out. And the reason why anyone can rewire their brain is because everyone wired their brain in the first place.
Right.
Nobody else did it for us. It didn't come as a package deal. Infants are amazingly unable to do anything. And so from the very beginning of our life, we have to start doing things. We have to do repetitive motions. We have to learn to walk. We have to learn to talk. And all of that process wires our brain. So now that most of us who are probably listening are well along in having wired their brain into adulthood, that ability still exists. And now the choice is, what do you want to wire your brain to do? Because anything you do will wire your brain in new circuits. So make a choice. Make a choice. And if that choice is chanting, which is a very powerful practice, it will gradually make not just the singing part of it, but the inner experience part of it, the focus, the bringing the heart into harmony, the bringing the mind into focus. Your brain will rewire to support all that. So whether it's chanting, whether it's quietly meditating, whether it's deliberately being creative, whether it's doing affirmations, you can rewire your brain with any of those tools. And as you rewire your brain with those tools, your use of those tools becomes more and more effective.
I love this. I wish there was so much more time. I want to cover one last thing. It's throughout your book. I love it. It's when you talk about superconscious. And there's so much in here about superconscious, but superconscious awareness. And then you go on, and I can't remember, I think it's somewhere towards latter part of the book. You really talk to us and you say, look, let me just talk to you about a couple of things, but I want to talk to you about this thing right here. And you say, look, there are things that are blocks. Hence, that was the question I asked you earlier, emotional stress blocks. And I think you say there are certain negative blocks, therefore, that require a specific effort to overcome. Yes. You see, so much in the consciousness spiritual arena doesn't even want us to use the word negative.
Uh-huh.
But what you're saying is, don't be preoccupied with them. Don't become obsessed with them. But we can do something about them. And I think that's been the missing link for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that it's very common for us to have negative emotional patterns, whether it's falling into stress, falling into depression.
Yeah.
Stress is the main one. That keeps us from relaxing, keeps us from being aware of anything other than this physical body and the kind of the drama we're playing out in this physical world. And we need to become aware of them. And introspection is a very valuable tool for anybody to learn to practice.
Yeah.
And as I suggest in the book, since tension is usually that what we're dealing with as a result of negative patterns of emotion, ask yourself on a daily, biweekly, weekly basis, ask yourself the question, what made me tense? Just ask that question. What made me tense today? And you can write it down. That's a great practice. Journaling can be valuable, but you don't have to do that. Just ask the question on a regular basis. And I think what you will find is you will identify a pattern of reaction to certain things. Maybe you feel unsafe. Maybe you feel threatened. Maybe you feel like you're just not going to be able to succeed. You'll begin to notice that pattern. And once you notice that pattern, then you can do something about it in a specific way. Meditation in general is the great panacea, because when you connect into spirit, it harmonizes all your emotions. But if you have a particular emotion that comes up over and over and over again, you can find an affirmation that is the positive antidote to that negative emotion. Yeah. Don't try to suppress that negative emotion. Don't try to repress it. Don't try to pretend you don't have it. Just accept that you have it and say, okay, what would be the positive emotion? So let's say you do feel unsafe routinely. You're worried about your job. You're worried about your relationships. You just don't feel safe in this world. Find an affirmation that combines practicality and spirit that you can say over and over and over again until you believe it, that you are safe, you are a child of God, you are made of spirit, that you are untouchable. And to begin with, honestly, you won't believe it because the negative emotion is working against it. But persist until you begin to believe in the reality of your higher self.
I love it.
You're one foot in heaven, in the positive emotion. And you can eliminate, not repress, but you can eliminate the hold that negative emotion has on you. And the positive emotion that you're substituting for it becomes more and more the thing you go into naturally, that the brain rewires to stimulate that emotion rather than the unwanted emotion that you were having trouble with. But you only need to do that if this emotion is so significant that you can't get past it.
Yeah. Look, I love this, and I hope you'll come back because I want to really bring this to the forefront, especially as we move into next year. And I have to put, like they got warning on labels. I want to put a little label out. I want to put something out there for people that want to take on everything. They want to eat the whole thing.
Right.
Your book says one major thing.
Right.
You may be tempted now to go into next year and have one major thing at a time. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Again, your website. I just like to know your personal message, what you'd like to leave us with. Thank you so much for really bringing this to light for us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Definitely.
What's your personal message? What would you like to leave us with today?
You are so much more than you know. You're just way more than you know, that you are one with spirit. You are God's children, and you're made in God's image, and every aspect of God is an aspect of you. And this is just a mind-bendingly large proposition to take in, but it's true. And we can experience it bit by bit through meditation and by putting the experiences we have in meditation to work in our lives.
I love it. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much for everything.
My pleasure.
As I said before, go to Joseph's website, Joseph Selbie, SELBIE.com. Make sure you check out the book. There's so much more in here, especially as you go through the book, very specifically the how-tos and the whys. Thank you, Joseph, for everything. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you all. Best audience on the planet. We're going to be doing an entire panel on this as we move forward into 2023. Stay tuned. Joseph, of course, will be part of it. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.